What's going on YouTube? Flashy here, and welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. And for me, Solar Titan has some of the most fun abilities, and the build we're going to be talking about today is all about spamming those abilities as much as possible. With this build, we'll constantly be Radiant, Restoration is going to be healing us non-stop, there's going to be sunspots all over the place, and enemies are going to be scorched and igniting into massive solar explosions. Before we get into it, be sure to leave a like on the video, it helps out the channel a ton, and hit subscribe so you get notified of new Destiny 2 videos here. But now let's get into the build, starting with the subclass, of course. First up, our super, and we'll be grabbing Hammer of Soul. I honestly can't get enough of this super, both for bosses and ad clearing. It just never gets old. Plus, with all the orbs that are around this season, you get this back so quickly, it's absolutely amazing. For our abilities, we'll be taking Towering Barricade, but Rally Barricade works as well. This is kind of just personal preference here. Strafe Lift for our jump. Throwing Hammer is going to be our melee, and it's important to know, after we throw our hammer, we can pick it up, and it will fully recharge. And if you pick it up after you hit a target, you also get Cure, which is going to heal you. And for our grenade, we'll be taking Firebolt Grenade, which is going to scorch targets and also get some buffs thanks to our seasonal mods, which we're going to go over in a second. And moving over to the aspects, we'll be taking Soul Invictus, Solar Ability Final Blows, Hammer of Soul Impacts, and defeating scorched targets is going to make a sunspot. When we're standing in sunspots, our abilities regen faster and our super drain slower, and sunspots also give us restoration. Furthermore, for enemies, sunspots scorch and damage them. Basically, sunspots are all over the place and they are just feeding you buffs while also scorching all the enemies around. Sunspots are just so good. You want to make sure you're always standing in or at least passing through them. Our second aspect, which believe it or not is actually even more insane than Soul Invictus, is going to be Roaring Flames. Final blows with solar abilities or ignitions increase damage of your solar abilities and stacks up to 3 times. So whenever you have Roaring Flames times 3 and you throw your hammer, it deals so much damage. Plus, you just pick the hammer up and it fully regens, and you just keep on cycling through that loop. And you are just destroying everything by essentially pressing one button over and over again. Now, going down into the fragments, I tend to mention this quite a bit with Void, but for Solar Titan as well, a lot of the fragments are really, really good, and you can honestly make a case for using any of these. However, these are the 4 that I like to run. Starting with Ember of Torches, powered melee attacks against combatants make you and nearby allies radiant. And for those that do not know, when you're radiant, your weapons gain increased damage and pierce barrier champions, and our abilities are getting a damage buff from Roaring Flames. The second fragment is going to be Ember of Ashes. You apply more scorch stacks to targets. The third fragment is going to be Ember of Empyrean. Solar weapon or ability final blows extend the duration of restoration and radiant effects applied to you. And finally, Ember of Solace. Radiant and restoration effects applied to you have increased duration, pairing very nicely with the Ember of Empyrean. Now that our subclass is all set and we've essentially turned ourselves into a solar death machine, it's important to look at the seasonal mods we can grab before we look at the armor mods. And the ones you want to focus on are authorized mods Solar, making armor energy costs affecting solar weapons cost only 1 energy. Shatter Orbs, the first time you break a combatant's shield, you create an orb of power if you broke it with the matching damage type. So anything with solar shields is going to just feed us orbs. Solar Surge, collecting a fire sprite gives you an armor charge. Flare Up, Firebolt Grenades apply more scorch to targets, and damaging a combatant with Firebolt Grenade spawns a fire sprite. And also Rain of Firebolts, you gain a second Firebolt Grenade, obviously these two being the reason we chose Firebolt Grenades in our subclass. Now, I've mentioned it a few times, but this build is all about using our abilities, throwing tons of Firebolt Grenades to scorch targets and make fire sprites, throwing and picking up our hammer, stacking up Roaring Flame buffs, getting our super very quickly thanks to all the orbs. But there are also some weapons that pair very nicely with this build, and to give you guys a few of my personal recommendations, starting with the special slot, and this being my most recommended weapon for this build, that is the Prometheus Lens Exotic Trace Rifle with the intrinsic trait Prismatic Inferno. Fires a solar trace beam that creates a field of heat energy that grows as the weapon is fired. Sustained damage applies scorch to the target. This is what you've been seeing in all the background gameplay. I've been loving trace rifles this season, and this one just fits perfectly with this build. If you're more of a hand cannon kind of person, Sunshot is also great. Applying scorch and causing solar explosions fits very nicely with this build. You really just want your weapons to apply scorch, so if you don't have these exotics or don't want to use an exotic in your special slot, just make sure you grab a solar weapon with incandescent because you want to be spreading scorch. Moving over to the heavy slot, of course, Galahorn is fantastic. It fits any build, not just solar ones, but it just so happens to be solar, so it works nicely here. Another solid go-to solar exotic weapon is going to be Xenophage, but since I'm using my exotic slot for the special, I need to use a legendary heavy, and the one that I've been using is Unwavering Duty from Trials of Osiris with incandescent, again, spreading as much scorch as we can, even if we're not using our ability. abilities. And to quickly go over the stats, you pretty much only need to focus on resilience and discipline. In theory, you don't need strength because you can pick up your hammer and it instantly regens, but we'll also have some armor mods that are going to help us with getting our powered melee back in case we can't pick up the hammer for whatever reason. Intellect helps, but there's so many orbs and rally flags and activities right now, you'll have your super all the time. Recovery isn't really needed with this build because we get restoration from just walking through our sunspots, and then mobility isn't really needed on a Titan at all. And for our exotic armor piece, the go-to for me is always Syntheseps, which has the armor perk Biotic Enhancements, increased melee lunge range, and improved melee and super damage when you're surrounded. This just pairs so nicely with our hammers, it's just such a good exotic. And now over to the armor mods. First on the helmet, we're going to be grabbing a Solar Siphon, Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows, create an Orb of Power, and we're also going to be grabbing an Ammo Finder. Either special or heavy is fine, it just kind of depends on what weapon you're using. I feel like Trace Rifles kind of bleed ammo, so I tend to go with the special Ammo Finder. For the gauntlets, we'll be grabbing Heavy-Handed, your powered melee final blows create an Orb of Power, as well as Momentum Transfer, causing damage with grenade reduces your melee cooldown. On the chest piece, I keep it simple. I just grab Solar Reserves, increasing the amount of solar weapon ammo we carry, and then any of these resistances are going to work well, just depending on what activity you're running. On the leg armor, we're going to grab Orbs of Restoration. Picking up an Orb of Power grants a small amount of energy to your ability with the least energy. One copy of Invigoration reduces melee cooldown each time you pick up an orb, and Solar Holster gradually reloads your stowed solar weapons over time. And finally, for the Titan Mark, one copy of Outreach reduces melee cooldown when using your class ability, and one copy of Bomber reduces your grenade cooldown when using your class ability. Also, I've been messing around with some of these finisher mods. They're not completely necessary, but I do take 1-2 finisher just in case my melee is on cooldown. I can just grab a few finishers and get it back relatively quickly. So overall, with this build, we'll always be Radiant, granting increased weapon damage. Roaring Flames is going to be stacked up to 3 times, increasing our solar ability damage. We're constantly making sunspots, which is giving us restoration. Our solar weapon kills are extending that restoration and the Radiant. We essentially have an unlimited powered melee as long as we keep picking it up, and our super is constantly up. I'm not going to lie, it's been pretty hard to not play on Void this season, but this Solar Titan build makes me think otherwise. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know down in the comments if you decide to try this out, and tell me what you think. If you guys are interested in the appearance customization I use for this build, it's on screen now if you want to screenshot it. The dim link for this build will also be down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all on the next one.